Richard Cohen has been a columnist with the Washington Post since Jimmy Carter's administration. He's seen it all, but what he has never seen is a major party candidate for president who he would compare to Hitler. Until now. Richard Cohen's latest must-read column is entitled Trump's Hitlerian Disregard for the Truth. Hitler had his own truth. That is Richard Cohen's point. Everything Hitler said about the Jews, he believed. So it is, says Richard Cohen, with Donald Trump. He doesn't think that Donald Trump is lying about President Obama's birthplace. He thinks Donald Trump believes that President Obama was not born in the United States. And that, in Trump's mind, he was only lying when his campaign staff forced him to say that the president was born in the USA. The reason he did not apologize for having so long insisted otherwise is that an apology would have crossed his personal red line. Like a child, he had his fingers crossed. Donald Trump said something tonight about African Americans that is stupid and untrue, and every child in every American school that observes Martin Luther King Jr. Day every year knows that this is untrue.
African American communities are absolutely in the worst shape that they've ever been in before, ever, ever, ever. You take a look at the inner cities, you get no education, you get no jobs, you get shot walking down the street. They're worse. I mean, honestly, places like Afghanistan are safer than some of our inner cities.
What do you think you just saw? What do you think all those white people sitting behind Donald Trump were just listening to? Were you watching an exploitive politician who knows better, who doesn't believe what he's saying is true? Or were you watching the most ignorant person in the history of American presidential campaigns who is so deeply ignorant of our own history that when he extemporaneously invents lies like that, he believes what he is saying? Which one of those were you watching? And which is worse? Which is more loathsome, more dangerous? The sociopath who would say that knowing it's not true, or the sociopath who would say that believing it is true? Richard Cohen, who, as I said, has seen it all, including the presidential candidacy of a segregationist George Wallace, is worried. He is very worried because Germany was not some weird place when Adolf Hitler became chancellor, came to power. Richard Cohen sees the Germany of that time as being not all that different from other countries. And he is worried because, quote, in 1933, Germany chose a sociopathic liar as its leader. If the polls are to be believed, we may do the same. We are now only 48 days away from possibly electing a president who thinks that African Americans were better off in slavery than they are today, who thinks that African Americans were better off when segregation was legal than they are today, a president who apparently has no idea why we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. Day, no idea what Martin Luther King Jr. achieved, what he suffered, how he risked his life and lost his life in fighting for the most basic rights for African Americans. Donald Trump doesn't seem to know that African Americans were not better off when they didn't have the right to vote. That none of us were better off when African Americans didn't have the right to vote because we lived in a country that tolerated and legalized egregious immorality. A country that normalized vicious immorality toward African Americans on a daily basis. That was the country Donald Trump was born into. Segregation was legal when Donald Trump was in elementary school and high school. He never raised his voice against it. Donald Trump was in college when young men and women were leaving their colleges to go south as freedom riders to join the fight for civil rights. He didn't join them. And apparently, he never even thought about them, even after some of them were murdered. Because Donald Trump said tonight that things were much, much better then for African Americans, back when they wouldn't get shot walking down the street, as he claims they do now. Donald Trump forgets the thousands of lynchings African Americans suffered. He does not know that crime rates are down, that murder rates are down. They are lower than they were in the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, or whenever in Donald Trump's dreamscape things were better for African Americans. Or maybe he does know. Maybe Richard Cohen is wrong, and Donald Trump is not the same kind of liar that Hitler was. Maybe. But then we're still left with the question, which one is worse? Joining us now, Rick Wilson, Republican strategist and contributor to the website Heat Street. He is an advisor to the Evan McMullen independent presidential candidate. Also with us, Mark Thompson, host of Make It Plain on Sirius XM Radio. Mark, as soon as I heard what Donald Trump had to say, I just said, we got to get Mark in here. It's just, you know, it's a painful thing to listen to and to see that crowd's reaction listening to it. And we don't know, they were silent during that part of it. We don't know how many of them believe that to be true, how many of them think it's a lie, how many, I don't know what their reaction to it is.
Well, as always, Lawrence, thanks for having me. Your words were profound. He is truly ignorant, but he is historically consistent in his ignorance. Reverend Barber in North Carolina, as a matter of fact, and I often preach the same sermon. We won't say who stole the sermon from whom. But
well, listen, I was preaching Richard Cohen's sermon just now, so I want to give Richard all the credit for that.
Indeed, and God bless Richard. I know him well. The period after Reconstruction was known as Reclamation. And so during Reconstruction, we got the right to vote. Thousands of African Americans elected throughout the South in local positions, even in the House and Senate, former slaves in the House and Senate. The first Congressional Black Caucus. What was the reaction of the white supremacists? It was to criminalize us. Dr. Sharsha McIntyre wrote a book about it, Criminalizing a Race. And we were run down and talked about, and the movie Birth of a Nation came out. We lost the right to vote. Dr. King himself talked about that on the steps of the Montgomery Capitol at the end of the March for Selma in Montgomery, how white and black were divided purposely at that time. Dr. King's own words, African Americans were fed the Bible, whites were fed Jim Crow. What Donald Trump is doing is not showing concern at all by saying we're worse off than ever. The words he uses are very specific and very strategic. He's criminalizing us again. He's speaking to the alt-right. Don't know how many alt-right people were in that audience, but the audience he's really talking to is the alt-right. African Americans are no worse off than we were doing, so we all know that. However, and let me just say, the new numbers came out. The economy has improved for everybody under President Obama, including African Americans. We also know that we are living in an era of modern-day lynchings by the police. So again, what Trump is doing is exploiting that atmosphere, criminalizing us. We have no good jobs, no good schools, no education, violence, get shot every day. That is a way of criminalizing us while the police are shooting us down. Someone concerned about us, as Hillary Clinton said on the Steve Harvey show, is going to talk about what happened to Terrence Crutcher over the weekend. Is going to talk about some of the other things that are affecting us. Anybody who is putting us down, in fact, putting us as victims down any further, is not our friend, and Donald Trump isn't our friend at all. And he keeps reciting that poem, the Al Wilson song, the soul single, The Snake. Again, he's being Freudian again, because Donald Trump himself is the snake.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rick, go ahead.
You know, I mean, look, the arc of Donald Trump's idiocy is long, but bends asymptotically towards infinite stupidity. I mean, this is a guy who, you know, I would love to give him the benefit of the doubt and say he just didn't think it through. He's just dumb as a sack of hair. But honest to God, with the guy, he has been so divisive. He has been so determined to open up a racial chasm in this country, in part because he is a guy who is backed in large measure by a group of white supremacists and neo-Nazis and frog meme idiots. And he's proud of that. He loves those people. They are his base. They are his core. They are what Donald Trump loves most. So I'd love to give him the benefit of the doubt and say he was just being dumb, because you can obviously make that assumption about almost anything he opens his cake hole on. But the fact of the matter is, I have to see there's something darker about Donald Trump. And when he makes statements like this, he's appealing to, he's not appealing to African Americans, you're not trying to sell them, he's trying to sell anxious white voters who smell the racism coming off this guy, and they loathe it and they're nervous about it. But he's a guy who can't acknowledge slavery. He can't acknowledge the Klan's a bad group. He can't acknowledge David Duke as an evil human being. This is a guy who's way too deep. He's hip deep in this stuff, and it's really hard to give him a pass on it.
So, Rick, just so I can clarify here and put you down in the right column, on the Richard Cohen notion, the theory that Donald Trump actually believes his lies, are you in the he believes the lies because he's so stupid, or he knows their lies and he's telling them anyway?
No, I think he knows their lies,
Yeah.
and look, I don't give him a pass on anything regarding race or anti-Semitism or any of these other games he plays, because they have been too consistent over time. And for Trump, white supremacist support is not a bug of his program, it's a feature.
This is today President Obama addressed the United Nations. This is his last time as president addressing the United Nations. Our next president will be the next U.S. president to do it. I don't suggest anyone imagine Donald Trump doing this while we watch President Obama do it. That would be too painful an exercise. But let's watch what the president had to say today at the UN.
Our nation began with a promise of freedom that applied only to the few, but because of our democratic Constitution, because of our Bill of Rights, because of our ideals, ordinary people were able to organize and march and protest, and ultimately those ideals won out. Open doors for women and minorities and workers in ways that made our economy more productive and turned our diversity into a strength. That gave innovators the chance to transform every area of human endeavor. That made it possible for someone like me to be elected President of the United States.
Mark, two major party candidates for president. One of them understands all of that, and one understands not a single word of it.
Again, Donald Trump wants to do what those did back at the turn of the century during Reconstruction. They wanted to reverse the election of the first Congressional Black Caucus. He and his minions want to reverse the election of the first African-American president. And listen, man, I'm hearing that people at the UN not far from here are talking about this. They are horrified. Mm-hmm. I mean, this has taken over the whole conversation. Can this man be president? That's what they're asking. They're looking at us saying, are you all really about to elect this crazy man? Because he's a wild card. Nobody knows what he's going to do. It is a horrifying experience.
I think Mark's exactly on target. I think Mark's on target. There is a great deal of anxiety about the temperament you need as president.
Yeah.
And no matter what you think about Donald Trump as a showman, a performer, a reality TV star, a pitchman, a guy who sells weird steaks and bad water, this is a guy who does not have the temperament to go and deal with the international problems and crises this country faces, because basically he doesn't understand those problems except through the lens of how do they make Trump look, and he doesn't understand how to proceed in any way that reflect the best values of this country. He proves that every day.
Rick Wilson, thank you very much for joining us, and Mark Thompson, thank you.
Thank you, man.
For joining us once again. Really appreciate it.